What is the most valuable company in history? Apple? Microsoft? Amazon? What if I told you there was a company 400 years ago that was worth more than all of them combined? A company so powerful it didn't just have shareholders, it had its own army, its own navy, and the legal right to wage war, sign treaties, and even execute prisoners. This is not the story of a kingdom or an empire. This is the story of a corporation, the Dutch East India Company, or the VOC. This is the incredible, brutal, and revolutionary story of how a spice company became the world's first publicly traded corporation, invented the modern stock market, and grew into a financial titan that ruled the waves and shaped the world we live in today. Our story begins at the dawn of the 16th century, in the small but incredibly wealthy Dutch Republic. The new obsession of Europe was spices, cloves, nutmeg, mace. Found only on a few tiny islands in the East Indies, modern-day Indonesia, these spices were worth more than their weight in gold. A single sack of cloves could buy a mansion, but getting them was a suicide mission. The journey was a 10,000-mile odyssey that took years around the treacherous coasts of Africa and across the pirate-infested Indian Ocean. Ships were little more than floating coffins. Disease, starvation, and storms meant that for every ship that left, there was a good chance it would never return. The risk was immense, but the potential reward was astronomical. Dozens of small Dutch companies competed fiercely, driving up costs and driving down profits. The Dutch government saw this chaos as a national weakness. In 1602, they did something unprecedented. They forced all of these competing companies to merge into a single massive entity, the United Dutch East India Company, or the VOC. And to fund this colossal enterprise, they invented a financial tool that would change the world forever. Instead of a few rich merchants funding a single voyage, the VOC allowed anyone, from a wealthy regent to a humble baker, to invest in the company itself by buying a share. For the first time in history, a company's ownership was divorced from its management. You could own a piece of this grand enterprise without ever setting foot on a ship. The modern stock market was born. The company was an instant success, raising a staggering amount of capital and becoming a financial superpower overnight. Armed with a mountain of cash from its shareholders and a state-sanctioned charter, the VOC was no ordinary trading company. It was a company-state, a hybrid of corporation and empire. Its charter gave it a 21-year monopoly on all Dutch trade east of Africa. But more importantly, it gave the company quasi-governmental powers. The VOC could build forts, sign treaties with local rulers, mint its own currency, and, most crucially, maintain its own private army and navy. Its mission was not simply to trade for spices, but to conquer and control the entire spice trade at its source. And it did so with brutal, terrifying efficiency. The most valuable spices, nutmeg and mace, grew only on a tiny cluster of islands known as the Banda Islands. To secure its monopoly, the VOC invaded. In 1621, under the command of the ruthless Jan Pieterszoon Cohen, the company's soldiers systematically massacred or enslaved almost the entire native population of the islands, an estimated 15,000 people. With the competition eliminated, the VOC now had an absolute global monopoly on nutmeg and mace. They could name their price, and Europe had no choice but to pay it. The profits were astronomical, sometimes over 1,000%. This unimaginable wealth flowed back to the Dutch Republic, funding its golden age. The Grand Canal houses of Amsterdam were, in many ways, built on the profits of this brutal corporate warfare. At its peak, the VOC was a behemoth. It commanded over 150 merchant ships, 40 warships, and a private army of 10,000 soldiers. Its global workforce dwarfed that of any rival. It was the logistical heart of a global trading network, moving not just spices, but silks from Persia, tea and porcelain from China, and textiles from India. For nearly 2 centuries, the VOC was the richest and most powerful corporation on the planet, a testament to the terrifying power of combining capital, technology, and military force. From the outside, the VOC was an invincible colossus, but on the inside, the seeds of its own destruction were being sown. The first poison was corruption. The company's own motto was, "God is great, but trade is greater." VOC executives, known as the Heeren 17 or the Gentleman 17, were thousands of miles and years away from the action. Company employees in Asia, seeing the vast wealth flowing around them, began trading for their own private accounts, a practice strictly forbidden. They used company ships and resources to build their own personal fortunes, slowly bleeding the corporation dry from within. The second problem was the very nature of its trade. The high-profit spice monopoly that had built the empire could not last forever. Competitors, primarily the British East India Company, began to grow in power. The VOC was forced to diversify into less profitable, higher-volume goods like tea, silk, and cotton. They were now in a game of smaller margins and tougher competition. The era of easy 1,000% returns was over. But the shareholders in Amsterdam still demanded their massive annual payouts, their dividends. So to keep its stock price high and its investors happy, the VOC began to do something that many modern companies would recognize. It started taking on massive debt just to pay the dividends. The company was slowly becoming a hollow shell, maintaining the outward appearance of immense profitability while its financial foundations rotted away. The sheer size of the company also became a crippling weakness. It was a massive, bloated bureaucracy. A decision made in Amsterdam could take 2 years to reach a governor in Batavia and for a reply to return. It was too slow and too unwieldy to adapt to the rapidly changing global market. The corporate giant was losing its agility, weighed down by its own immense size and complexity. The world's first great corporation was now suffering from the world's first great corporate sclerosis. The final, fatal blow came not from a boardroom, but from a battlefield. The Fourth Anglo-Dutch War, which broke out in 1780, was a catastrophe for the VOC. The superior British Royal Navy decimated the company's fleet, severing its vital trade routes to Asia. Its ships were captured, its cargo plundered. The lifeblood of the corporation was cut off. Suddenly, the company's massive debts and internal rot were exposed to the harsh light of day. It was effectively bankrupt, a zombie corporation kept alive only by emergency loans from the Dutch state. In 1799, after nearly 2 centuries of global dominance, the Dutch government dissolved the once mighty VOC, absorbing its territories and its monumental debts. The richest corporation in history was no more. So what does the epic rise and fall of this trillion-dollar company teach us today? It is the original blueprint for both the triumphs and the tragedies of the modern corporation. The VOC's innovations, the public stock, limited liability, the multinational structure, are the very foundations of our global capitalist system. But its story is also a timeless warning. It shows how a relentless pursuit of profit can lead to horrific atrocities and brutal exploitation. It demonstrates how internal corruption and a failure to adapt can bring down even the most powerful enterprise. And most importantly, it's a 400-year-old case study in the dangers of a corporation becoming too big to fail, growing so intertwined with the state that its collapse becomes a national catastrophe. History reminds us that no company, no matter how rich or powerful, is immortal. The same forces that destroyed the VOC, fierce competition, changing markets, internal decay, and the crushing weight of debt, are the same forces that every major corporation in the world still battles today. It's a fundamental struggle, a story of ambition and ruin, first written on the high seas, in the pursuit of spice. If you believe these lessons from the past are crucial for understanding our present, please show your support with a like. And to continue this journey through the forgotten financial stories that shaped our world, be sure to subscribe.